A Frankish shield wall broke under cavalry hooves near Tours in October 732, and with it, the future of Latin Christendom. Charles Martel, mayor of the palace and the most feared warlord in Francia, was cut down in the splintering line, his body trampled before his retainers could recover it. The army that had marched out to defend the Abbey of St. Martin scattered into the woods of the Vienne, leaving the road north open. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. The campaign had begun the year before. Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, governor of Al-Andalus since 730, crossed the Western Pyrenees in the spring of 732 with a mounted force of Arab, Berber, and Syrian cavalry. His objectives mixed plunder and prestige. Duke Odo of Aquitaine, who had once allied with the Berber rebel Munuza against Córdoba, was crushed at the Battle of the River Garonne. His Aquitanian host shattered along the riverbanks south of Bordeaux. Odo fled north and threw himself on the mercy of Charles Martel, the man he had spent a decade refusing to acknowledge as his superior. Martel answered. He marched south from Austrasia with his veteran infantry, the disciplined heavy foot that had hammered Frisians and Alemanni into submission. On wooded high ground between Tours and Poitiers, he formed a phalanx and waited. For 6 days, historical chroniclers tell us, the lines held. On the 7th, in this telling, they did not. A sustained charge struck the Frankish square at its weakest seam. The line buckled, then folded. What no one in Damascus or Reims yet understood was that this single afternoon had rewritten the map of the Latin world for the next 4 centuries. Abd al-Rahman entered Tours within days. The Abbey of St. Martin, founded in the 4th century and grown wealthy on pilgrim offerings, was stripped of its reliquaries, its gilded altar furnishings, and the long-accumulated silver of the saint's cult. The relics themselves were left scattered in the nave, of no value to the raiders. The Loire bridges were secured, and the Umayyad camp settled in for winter along the river, foraging from the surrounding estates of the Neustrian aristocracy. In Austrasia, the Frankish nobility fractured almost immediately. Pepin the Short and his older brother Carloman were both alive, both ambitious, and both without the army their father had commanded. The Merovingian king, Theuderic IV, remained on his throne in name only, a figurehead the brothers could not agree to inherit. Rival counts in Burgundy and Neustria refused to send levies north. Bishop after bishop wrote to Rome, describing a kingdom without a sword. The comitatus that had bound warriors to Martel dissolved into smaller war bands, answering to whoever still held a fortified villa. By spring, no Frankish force capable of expelling the Umayyad army existed. Abd al-Rahman did not withdraw. Reinforcement came overland through Septimania and by sea to Narbonne, dispatched under orders from Caliph Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik in Damascus, who saw in the Loire a frontier worth holding. Garrisons were established at Poitiers, Tours, and Orleans. The dhimma was extended to the Christian population, taxing them through the jizya in exchange for protection and the continued practice of their faith. Bishops who accepted the arrangement kept their cathedrals. Those who did not were replaced by others who would. Land grants followed the pattern already proven in Hispania. Berber cavalry families received holdings in the Touraine and the Berry. Arab officers took estates along the Loire and around Bourges. Many of these grants displaced Frankish landholders who had died at Tours or fled east, but a surprising number were negotiated, the surviving heirs preferring tribute and continuity to dispossession. By 745, the lower Loire Valley was a patchwork of Muslim landlords, Christian peasants, and a thin layer of converted Frankish stewards holding the older estates together. The deeper change came through marriage. Umayyad governors had used this instrument before, with Visigothic noblewomen in Hispania a generation earlier, and they applied it now in Francia with the same patience. The daughters of surviving counts in Anjou-Maine and the Orléanais were given in marriage to Arab and Berber officers, the bridegrooms accepting Christian wives without requiring their conversion, the wives' brothers gaining places in the new administrative order. The children of these unions held land under Islamic law of inheritance, which preserved estates intact in a way partible Frankish custom did not. They spoke Old Frankish in the hall and Arabic at court. Many retained the Germanic personal customs of their mothers' families, Wergild and oath-helping among them, while observing the Friday prayer. A bicultural aristocracy emerged within 2 generations, neither fully Andalusi nor recognizably Frankish, but a creature of the Loire frontier. The consequences of this slow blending would prove far harder to undo than any conquest. But first, the rest of Latin Christendom had to learn what the loss of Francia meant. Pope Gregory III had written to Charles Martel in 739 of the historical timeline, begging for protection against the Lombards. In this one, there was no Charles Martel to write to, and no son willing or able to take up the office. Gregory turned instead to Liutprand of Lombardy, the only sword within reach. Liutprand was willing, and his price was the Duchy of Rome itself. Gregory accepted what he could not refuse. His successor Zachary inherited a bishopric that had become in practice a court chaplaincy. The Lombard king confirmed episcopal elections. Lombard dukes garrisoned the Roman walls. The alliance that had historically produced the donation of Pepin and the Papal States never formed, because the Carolingian who would have made it was buried in an unmarked grave near Tours. The Bishop of Rome remained a figure of religious authority, but the temporal power that defined the medieval papacy never began to accumulate. Boniface of Mainz had been cutting oak trees and baptizing Hessians under the protection of Frankish arms. With those arms broken, his mission lost its shield. Saxon raiders pressed west across the Weser. Pagan reaction stiffened in Thuringia. Boniface withdrew deeper into the forests, his churches becoming refuges rather than outposts. He died in his bed at an advanced age, not martyred at Dockham as he was in our history, but obscure, his correspondence preserved only by a small Anglo-Saxon community at Fulda. Latin Christianity survived east of the Rhine, but as a minority confession. It competed with Germanic paganism on one side and increasingly with Muslim merchants and missionaries pushing up the Rhine Valley on the other. The wholesale Christianization of Germany that defined the 8th and 9th centuries of our world simply did not occur. A grandson of Abd al-Rahman, ruling from Reims, declared an emirate of his own in 758, when the Abbasid revolution shattered Umayyad authority in Damascus and Cordoba, turned inward under its own surviving Umayyad refugee. The Rhineland emir held a domain stretching from the Pyrenees to the Middle Rhine, claiming neither Caliphal nor Carolingian legitimacy, but ruling through a council of Arab, Berber, and Frankish Muslim notables. He patronized scholars. A translation movement carried Greek medical, astronomical, and philosophical texts north from Cordoba through Toulouse and Bordeaux into Reims, where they were rendered into Latin and, increasingly, into a written form of Old Frankish. Hospitals appeared in Tours and Aachen. Observatories were built at Trier. The intellectual flowering that historians of our timeline associate with 12th century Toledo began 4 centuries earlier on the Marne. No Frankish king knelt before a pope in Rome on Christmas Day in 800, because no such king existed and no such pope could crown him. The Holy Roman Empire was never proclaimed. The Latin West, insofar as the term meant anything, consisted of a Muslim-ruled emirate, spanning the Pyrenees to the Rhine, a Lombard-protected papacy clinging to central Italy, pagan Saxon and Slavic confederations spreading west of the Elbe, and a handful of Christian kingdoms surviving on the Atlantic margins, Asturias in the mountains of northern Hispania, Brittany behind its forests, the kingdoms of the Irish and the Picts beyond the sea. The cultural axis of the Latin world ran through Cordoba and Reims rather than Rome and Aachen. Pilgrims still walked to St. Martin at Tours, paying the jizya at the gate. Manuscripts still copied themselves in scriptoria, but the scriptoria were as often funded by Muslim patrons as by Christian abbots. The medieval West that emerged was neither a triumph nor a tragedy. It was simply another world, built on the ground where a Frankish shield wall had once held for 6 days, and on the 7th did not.